In terms of representing God, I think we have to remember a couple things. One is God has already represented himself in us, right? So the language that's used, we are in the image of God. Humanity, male and female, are created in the image of God. So he has chosen one authorized image of himself,
Mhm.
and it is humanity. Now, the greatest then illustration of that is the God man himself, who is the express image of God. And so he is most fully human because he is without sin. So he's not as we are, broken as we are, yet he is also fully God. And so he comes as a different order of representation of God as true humanity, but also as true God. And so if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, he will say of him. So we do have authorized images of God. And so we need to think of that he is willing to have himself represented, but only by his choices. And part of that is us. So we're to represent a connection to him and a reflection of him in the world through our activities authorized in Genesis 1:26 to 28. And then Jesus comes as the express image of the Father. So he's spoken in all these other ways, but now he's spoken in him. So I think it's challenging. With Jesus, I am relatively comfortable representing him in human form because that is how he came. He was disclosed to us and disclosed the Father to us in a human form, just as we disclose God if we're, representing the image of him that's there. So I think that's sort of implicit that there's not much of a way if you're going to do any kind of pictorial representation. Jesus had physical form. Now we can get in all sorts of questions about, right, do we, anglicize him, and that becomes an
Right.
issue because that's not what those are
Cultural
kind of
questions.
separate
Yeah.
issues of making him in our image then at that point. But I think that representation, many would say, is fair and legitimate, not a violation of the commandment, because he came in that image
Right.
and was seen in that way. Most would say the artistic images of, say, the Spirit as cloud or fire, right? Isaiah 61 and 63 are going to talk about the Spirit in the cloud and fire in the wilderness. Obviously, we see him as represented as a dove. And then all the images related to wind and the movement of that happens, that language is used of the Spirit. So those kind of representations seem okay as well. They're consistent with the word pictures that it goes. And none of those violate, in my mind, the first or second command, because the first command is about who you worship. And if I'm representing Christ as a human in an art piece and I'm worshiping Christ, then that's not. So the second commandment, though, I think is still not an illicit image, not an image that we ascribe to him. He's a bull, he's an ox, he's a snake, whatever it might be. And it's not a representation of another deity. So I think that's okay.
Mhm.
I am personally more uncomfortable when we talk about something like Sistine Chapel and the representation, say, of God the Father.
Mhm.
Now
Mhm.
that's challenging because, right, the Father does imply human imagery. He does occasionally represent himself in figure through the Son as a human, right? So there are ways in which that language is used. I'm just a bit less comfortable for that.
Yeah.
Representation of the angels, I think, is not anywhere prohibited unless we are ascribing to them some sort of deity or worship. So the point that we view angels as intermediaries, Colossians is clear. This is a no-go. Timothy, there's one mediator, the man Jesus Christ. So we would get into those kinds of places if we're illicitly using the saints or angels as intermediaries, then that's the bigger issue than whether or not they're represented in physical form.
Right.
And so that's sort of the direction that I go and how a lot of people would understand that. Now, some will just be more cautious and say we shouldn't have any representation of any of the Trinity. And I think that can be a faithful place to be. I'm not sure it's required by Scripture, but I'm looking at who are you worshiping, and are you casting them in an image that they have, that the Trinity itself is not authorized, like Christ as a human is the express image of God.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And I resonate with that. I feel the same way. The father certainly feel is the most problematic member of the Trinity to represent. And I mean, you can kind of even get a sense of the kind of damage that representations have done when people like, atheists like Richard Dawkins or some think of the great sky daddy. You can already kind of see like how that image has been put into sort of the collective mind or the social consciousness, and is just utterly reduced God down to just, like some kind of Feuerbachian projection of ourselves. And that's obviously that we got to kind of do apologetics against that.
And it wouldn't be a problem if you are a Mormon. They wouldn't have any problem representing Father in physical form.
Correct.
Right. That could open up a whole nother can of worms on why Joseph Smith did that. But okay. But yeah, with the Son, we'd say, look, the Son had a body. This is a real Jesus. This is a human Jesus. This is the God man. And of course, again, I think there's still always concern about then how we represent Jesus in the culture. What words do we put into his mouth? How do we make him, and so on and so forth. And, maybe we'll have Doug Huffman on at some point to talk about his work on The Chosen, which I haven't seen yet, but I know
an interesting fact, just to touch on this, I learned recently is that if you look at any of the icons and representation of Jesus in particular, especially among the Orthodox Church, you would never find a picture of Jesus without a beard. The idea was, but you'll find angels without the beard. So the idea was that God becoming man, representing himself as a man. So they want to communicate that idea through the way of the icon. So that's one of the ways as well, pictures and idols. And it's more of a representation of who he is than it is that.